My mother paid my therapist $200 per session to share everything I said, and when I confronted them both, my mother said, "I pay. I have the right to know." There were 89 sessions over 2 years. When I accidentally opened that email on my mother's computer, my world collapsed in exactly 7 seconds, the time it took my eyes to scan the lines of a detailed report with date, time, and literal transcriptions of everything I had confided to my therapist in the last session, including the moment I cried talking about my insomnia and panic attacks that nobody, absolutely nobody besides her should know about. There were 15 printed pages, organized by date, with handwritten notes from my own mother in the margins, circling phrases like "still resentful about the divorce," mentions constant loneliness, considers that I failed as a mother. This last one underlined 3 times with red pen. My hand trembled holding those papers while my stomach churned. Not from the discovery itself, but from the level of detail, from the coldness with which each of my tears had been cataloged, documented, filed as evidence of something I didn't even know I was being judged for. It was 8:47 on a common Tuesday morning. The coffee was still steaming in the cup next to the keyboard, the sunlight coming through the window illuminating that improvised office where my mother worked from home. And I was there because I had forgotten my wallet at dinner the day before, and she had given me the spare key to get it before work, never imagining I would find proof of a betrayal that had lasted exactly 2 years, 3 months, and 12 days. The number at the bottom of the last page made me lose my breath. 89 sessions. 89 times I sat on that beige couch, took off my shoes, took a deep breath and opened my chest to talk about my insecurities, my fears, my guilt for not being able to make my marriage work, my anguish at not meeting the expectations I felt upon me, the constant pressure to be perfect, to never fail, to always smile even when I was falling apart inside. 89 times that Dr. Patricia looked at me with those compassionate eyes, nodded, made her discreet notes and said that this was a safe space, that everything said there would stay between us, protected by the sacred professional confidentiality she had sworn to maintain. 89 betrayals. 89 times my mother paid $200, not for my therapy, but to buy access to my naked and vulnerable soul. $17,800 invested in violating my privacy, in mapping every weakness, every wound, every thought I hid from the world. The calculation came automatically in my math professor head, and the amount made me sick. It was more than some people earn in 6 months. It was the price my mother considered fair to spy on me through a professional I trusted blindly. I sat in her swivel chair, still holding those papers as if they were toxic, and started reading. I couldn't stop. It was like watching a horror movie of my own life, narrated by a distorted and clinical version of myself. Patient reports recurring feelings of inadequacy, especially regarding maternal expectations. Intense crying when describing episode in which she forgot mother's birthday and was publicly reprimanded at family lunch. Demonstrates pattern of seeking approval and fear of abandonment. I remembered that session. I remembered every detail. It was on the 13th appointment, a rainy Thursday, and I had arrived devastated because my mother had called me in front of the entire extended family to say I was selfish and inattentive, that she had done everything for me my whole life and I couldn't even remember an important date. I cried so much on that couch that Dr. Patricia offered me an entire box of tissues and chamomile tea. And now I discovered that each sob, each broken word, each painful confession had been packaged and delivered directly to the person who had caused that wound. It was like showing your wounds to a doctor and discovering he was reporting the exact location of each one to whoever beat you. I continued reading, unable to look away. Patient expresses significant guilt about the divorce, assumes excessive responsibility for the relationship's failure, mentions that mother always said she didn't know how to choose partners, and had warned about ex-husband from the beginning. Pattern of internalizing maternal criticism observed. My God. I had spent 6 entire sessions working through this guilt, trying to understand that the end of my marriage wasn't solely my responsibility, that Fernando and I simply weren't compatible, that we grew in different directions, that this was normal and didn't mean I was flawed or incapable of loving correctly. And while I was deconstructing and reconstructing myself in that room, trying to heal wounds my mother had opened with her cutting comments and sharp tongue, she was at home reading detailed reports of how her words had destroyed me, probably satisfied to be right, to have predicted my marriage wouldn't last, to be able to say, "I told you so," even if only to herself. The hypocrisy suffocated me. She paid for me to do therapy, because she cares about my mental health, as she always emphasized, but was actually buying ammunition, collecting information, maintaining absolute control over my emotional life. My vision started to blur, and I realized I was crying, hot tears running down my face and falling on those damn papers, smudging some words. But I didn't stop reading. I needed to know. I needed to understand the extent of that violation. Patient reveals passive suicidal thoughts without concrete plan related to post-divorce depression period. Mother was informed according to safety protocol. My heart stopped. That had happened in the 28th session, one of the darkest moments of my life, when I woke up every day wishing I hadn't woken up, when the idea of simply not existing anymore seemed like a tempting relief. I had told Dr. Patricia I had no plans, that I would never do something like that, but that sometimes, just sometimes, I thought how much easier it would be if I simply disappeared, and she had said it was important for me to talk about it, that recognizing these thoughts was the first step to overcoming them, that she was there to support me. Lies. All lies. She had run to call my mother, who showed up at my house 3 hours later with an expression of performative concern, hugged me, made tea, said I was strong and would overcome this, that she would always be there for me. I had felt loved in that moment, protected. Now I understood it was surveillance disguised as care. The phone rang and I almost jumped from the chair. It was my mother. Of course it was. She always called at this time to check if I was okay, if I had eaten breakfast, if I had slept well. Now I understood these weren't calls of maternal affection. They were quality control checks, verifications that her investment was paying off, that she kept the reins of my life firmly in her hands. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I couldn't talk to her yet. Not without exploding, not without saying things that couldn't be undone. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the turmoil inside me, but it was impossible. Every breath hurt, as if my lungs were full of glass shards. I looked at the digital clock on the desk. 9:23. I should be teaching class in 37 minutes. Impossible. I grabbed my phone and texted the department coordinator saying I was sick, that I couldn't make it. It wasn't a lie. I was sick. Sick from betrayal, from manipulation, from discovering that the two women I trusted most in the world had used me as a piece in a macabre game where I was the only one who didn't know I was playing. I went back to the papers. I had to read everything, every word, every report. I needed to know exactly what had been stolen from me. Patient discusses complex relationship with mother, oscillating between gratitude for financial support and resentment over excessive control. Expresses desire to establish clearer boundaries, but fears disappointing her. Pattern of codependency evident. This session had been 4 months ago. I had finally started to understand, with therapy's help, that my mother was controlling, that her love always came with conditions, that she used money as a manipulation tool. I was beginning to envision a life where I made my own decisions without needing her approval, where I could say no without feeling guilty, where I was the owner of my own story. And she knew. She knew everything. She knew I was trying to break free and probably intensified her efforts to keep me trapped. How many times after that session had she shown up with expensive gifts I didn't ask for? How many times had she offered financial help to make my life easier? How many times had she created situations where I felt indebted to her? Now everything made sense. She was playing chess while I thought we were just talking. There was more. Much more. 89 sessions were worth 80. 9 reports, some with 3-4 pages each. My hands trembled as I flipped through that archive of horror, recognizing fragments of my life, pieces of my soul exposed and dissected with cold clinical language. Patient reports feeling constantly observed and judged by family, especially at social gatherings. Describes anticipatory anxiety before family events, with physical symptoms including nausea and tachycardia. Mentions that mother frequently makes comments about her weight, appearance, and life choices in front of others. I remembered this conversation. It was after last Christmas when my mother had commented loudly in front of all the uncles and cousins that I was letting single life swallow me, and that I should take better care of myself if I wanted to find someone new. I had left that party feeling tiny, invisible, failed. Therapy was helping me process this pain, to understand I didn't need her validation, that my value didn't depend on my marital status or the pounds on the scale. And meanwhile, she was receiving detailed reports of how her barbs had pierced deep, how each comment left marks that took me weeks to begin healing. The sound of the key in the lock made me freeze. She was arriving. My mother was coming back. I looked around frantically, wanting to hide the papers, but no, I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to pretend I didn't see. I wasn't going to swallow this and smile like I always did. My whole life had been about swallowing, about accepting, about not making waves, about being the good and obedient daughter who never questioned, never complained, never disappointed. It's over. Today it ended. I held the papers tightly and stayed there, sitting in her chair, waiting. My heart beat so hard I could hear it in my ears, a frantic drum of anger and pain and betrayal. I heard her footsteps in the hallway, the familiar sound of her heels on the wooden floor. She was humming something, probably returning from her morning walk in the park, not imagining that her daughter had just discovered her dirtiest secret. I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to be cold, calculated. I was going to use words like scalpels. I was going to make her feel at least a fraction of the pain she caused me. When she appeared in the office doorway, still in gym clothes, holding a water bottle, her smile froze instantly when she saw me there, surrounded by papers, with a face marked by tears. There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. Births, deaths, marriages, divorces. This was one of those moments, the before, where I was an obedient daughter, trusting patient, naive woman who believed people respected boundaries and ethics, and the after, which was about to begin, where I would no longer be any of that, where I would be someone who had discovered that even the most sacred places can be profaned, that even the people who should protect you can betray you, that trust is a dangerous luxury in a world where everything, even your mental sanity, can be bought for $200 a session. I stood up slowly, the papers still in my hands, and looked her in the eyes, those brown eyes that always intimidated me, that always managed to make me feel small with just a look. But not today. Today I saw beyond them. I saw the manipulative woman, the controlling mother, the person who had turned my healing journey into a spy operation. My voice came out firmer than I expected, each word loaded with 2 years of violated sessions, betrayed confidences, a trust that could never be rebuilt. What are you doing here? Why are you going through my papers? Mariana's voice came out in a high-pitched tone, mixing surprise and poorly disguised panic, her hand still holding the water bottle that trembled slightly when her eyes finally focused on the documents I was holding. She knew. Of course she knew. The expression on her face changed in fractions of a second, going from initial confusion to something I could only describe as pure and raw guilt. It wasn't the guilt of someone caught doing something slightly wrong, like forgetting to water the plants or being late on a bill payment. It was the guilt of someone caught in the middle of a betrayal so deep and calculated that there was no plausible excuse, no explanation that could soften the horror of it. I raised the papers in front of me as if presenting evidence in a courtroom, and my voice came out with an icy calm that surprised me. 89 sessions, Mom. 89 times you paid to invade my privacy, to buy access to my most intimate thoughts, to turn my therapist into a spy. How long did you think you could hide this from me, or did you simply not care if I found out? Mariana dropped the water bottle on the desk with a dull thud, and her hands instinctively went to the pearl necklace she wore, a nervous gesture I'd known since childhood. That tic she always manifested when she was about to lie, or when she knew she'd been caught in something indefensible. Helena, honey, you don't understand. It's not what it seems. I can explain all this if you give me a chance to speak. If you sit down and take a deep breath and listen to me like an adult instead of standing there accusing me as if I were some common criminal, she began, using that condescending maternal tone that had always worked on me my whole life, that voice that made me feel like an irrational child having a tantrum instead of an adult woman confronting a serious and systematic violation of her privacy. But not today. Today that tone wasn't going to work. It's not what it seems? I laughed, but it was a humorless laugh, dry and bitter as bile. So explain to me what these detailed reports of every session I had with Dr. Patricia over the last 2 years are. Explain to me these handwritten notes in the margins, in your handwriting, circling specific parts of my most painful confessions. Explain to me why you highlighted 3 times the phrase where I said, I feel I failed as a daughter. Explain to me, Mom, because I really don't understand how this could be anything other than a calculated and systematic betrayal. Each word left my mouth like a thrust, cutting the air between us, and I saw the impact of them on Mariana's face, which was becoming progressively paler, more defensive, more desperate to find a narrative that could transform her villainy into something palatable. I had a right to know, Helena. I pay for these sessions. I pay $200 a week out of my own pocket to ensure you have the best possible treatment. And as a mother, as the person who is financing your mental health, I have the fundamental right to know how my money is being used. The words came out of her mouth with a conviction that left me temporarily speechless, not from the logic of the argument, which was obviously absurd, but from the audacity of turning an ethical crime into a matter of financial rights. She really believed this. I could clearly see in her eyes that Mariana genuinely thought that paying for therapy gave her ownership over the content of the sessions, as if I were a product she had bought and had the right to examine, dissect, evaluate. Are you telling me you think paying for therapy gives you the right to violate professional confidentiality? That you think your money buys access to my soul? That you think because you pay, you own my thoughts, my fears, my deepest insecurities? My voice was rising progressively in volume, something rare for me who had always been the calm daughter, the controlled one, the one who swallowed anger and transformed it into internalized anxiety. That's the problem with you, Mom. You always thought money buys everything, buys obedience, buys control, even buys the right to invade the privacy of people you supposedly love. But you know what money doesn't buy? Respect. And you just lost all the respect I still had for you. Mariana took a step toward me, hands extended in a gesture meant to be placating, but made me instinctively step back. Helena, you're being dramatic and irrational. You're taking a completely normal situation and turning it into a Greek tragedy because of your tendency to always exaggerate everything, always making a mountain out of a molehill as if the whole world were conspiring against you, she said. And now her tone had changed from defensive to offensive, using that familiar tactic of making me feel like I was the problem, that my justified reaction was actually a sign of emotional imbalance, pathological hypersensitivity. This was exactly what she always did. Turned my pain into my defect, my legitimate anger into evidence of my instability. Mothers have the right and obligation to know what's happening with their children, especially when they're paying for expensive treatments that cost a fortune every month. Dr. Patricia perfectly understood my legitimate maternal concern and agreed that, in the specific circumstances of your case, considering your history of anxiety and depression, it would be appropriate and even beneficial to keep me informed about your therapeutic progress so I could support you better at home. The way she reframed the situation was almost impressive, transforming systematic spying into legitimate maternal concern, buying confidential information into appropriate support, privacy violation into maternal right. Get out of my way, now. My voice came out low but loaded with an authority I didn't know I possessed. I'm going to Dr. Patricia's office right now, and I'm going to confront her personally about this grotesque professional betrayal that you two orchestrated behind my back for 2 entire years. And you're not going to follow me. You're not going to call to warn her I'm coming. You're not going to try to control any other aspect of this situation. It's over. Your reign of control over my life ended today, at this exact moment. I started walking toward the door, still holding those damn reports as evidence, but Mariana blocked my path, her hands gripping my shoulders with surprising strength for a 63-year-old woman. Helena, you can't go there and make a scene. You can't destroy the reputation of a respected professional because of a misunderstanding you're interpreting completely wrong because of your anxious mind that always distorts everything, she said. And now there was real desperation in her voice, genuine fear that her carefully constructed scheme was crumbling before her eyes. Think of Dr. Patricia. Think of her career. Think of how many patients she helps. Think of how you're going to feel responsible for destroying her professional life just because you're having a momentary emotional crisis that will pass as soon as you calm down and think rationally about this. I broke free from her grip with a sudden movement that almost made me knock over the hallway side table. Don't try to manipulate me with guilt. Mom, it doesn't work anymore. Dr. Patricia destroyed her own career the moment she accepted your dirty money in exchange for violating the sacred professional confidentiality she swore to maintain. She made that decision consciously, knowing perfectly well she was breaking fundamental ethical codes of her profession. And you destroyed our relationship the moment you decided that controlling my life was more important than respecting my autonomy as an adult human being. I managed to get past her and reach the front door, but before leaving, I turned one last time. Roberto was at the top of the stairs in a robe, clearly awakened by the noise of our argument, his confused face trying to process the scene unfolding downstairs. Roberto, your perfect adoptive father who always sides with her. Did you know about this too? Were you also aware that your wife was paying my therapist to spy on every word I said in session? He came down a few steps, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Helena, dear, I don't know what you're talking about. I just woke up to you two yelling, "What's happening here?" His confusion seemed genuine, but at that moment I didn't trust anyone in that family anymore. Ask your wife. Ask her about the $17,800 she spent buying detailed reports of my therapy sessions. I'm sure she'll have a wonderful explanation about how this is completely normal and appropriate. The cold morning air hit my face when I left the house, and only then did I realize I was still in pajamas, that I had forgotten my purse, my car keys, my phone. But I wasn't going back. I'd rather walk barefoot to Dr. Patricia's office if necessary. The clinic was about 40 minutes away by car, probably 2 hours walking. But I had enough adrenaline in my system to get there running if I needed to. I started walking down the sidewalk wet from the morning drizzle, the papers still pressed against my chest, when I heard a car braking next to me. It was Beatrice, my best friend, who had promised to pick me up for the breakfast we had scheduled. "Helena, what the hell is going on? Why are you on the street in pajamas holding a pile of papers like you escaped from a fire?" She got out of the car and came to me, and it was only when she touched my arm that I realized I was shaking violently, that my teeth were chattering, that tears were running down my face without my being aware of crying. "Bea, I found out. My mother, the therapist." The words wouldn't come out right. My throat was closed. My breathing came in short and painful sobs. Beatrice guided me to her car, put me in the passenger seat, turned the heater on maximum. "Breathe, Helena. Take a deep breath. Tell me what happened when you can talk." It took me about 10 minutes to control my breathing enough to form coherent sentences, and when I finally could, I told Beatrice everything while she drove toward Dr. Patricia's office. I showed her the reports, read excerpts aloud, explained about the confrontation with my mother. Beatrice listened in silence, but I could see her jaw getting increasingly tense, her hands gripping the steering wheel with growing force. "Your mother is a controlling psychopath, and that therapist needs to lose her license immediately," she said when I finished, her voice icy with contained rage. "This isn't just unethical, Helena. It's illegal. Professional confidentiality isn't a suggestion, it's a legal obligation. She can go to jail for this. Both of them can." That possibility hadn't even crossed my mind yet. I was so focused on the emotional betrayal that I hadn't stopped to consider the legal implications. "Bea, I don't even know what to do. I just want to look her in the eyes and ask her how she managed. How she looked at me session after session, faking empathy, faking that this was a safe space, knowing all along that every word of mine was going to be packaged and delivered to my mother. How does someone do that and continue sleeping at night?" We arrived at the office at 9:30 in the morning. The receptionist, a young woman with black hair and thick-framed glasses, looked at me with that professionally neutral expression she had probably practiced to deal with patients in various emotional states. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" Her voice was polite but mechanical. "No, but I need to speak with Dr. Patricia immediately. It's urgent. Extremely urgent." My voice still trembled, but there was determination in it that made the receptionist hesitate. "The doctor is in session at the moment and has a full schedule until 3 in the afternoon, but I can fit you in?" "No." I cut her off. Either she sees me now, or I go to that office and interrupt her session personally. Her choice. The receptionist blinked, clearly not accustomed to this level of assertiveness from normally docile patients. "Ma'am, you're visibly upset. Maybe it would be better to reschedule for when you're calmer. Call her, now. Tell her Helena is here, and that either she comes out of that room in the next 2 minutes or I'm going in. And trust me when I say she'll want to avoid me doing that." There was something in my tone that made the receptionist pick up the internal phone immediately. Dr. Patricia appeared at the hallway door less than a minute later, her expression of professional concern carefully calibrated. She wore a beige blazer over a cream silk blouse, black dress pants, hair pulled back in an impeccable low bun, the perfect image of the compassionate and ethical psychologist. Except now I saw beyond the facade. I saw the fraud, the traitor, the woman who sold confidences for $200 a session. "Helena, what a surprise to see you here outside our usual time. I notice you're visibly disturbed. Let's talk in my office in private where we can discuss what's bothering you," she said, her voice with that measured and soft cadence that psychologists learn to use to calm agitated patients. I laughed in her face, laughed loud and without humor. "Oh, we're going to talk, you can be sure. But not in your sacred office where you fake empathy while spying on me. Right here, in front of everyone." I took the reports from the folder Beatrice had given me in the car and threw them on the reception desk, the papers spreading out in a fan. "Explain this to me. Explain how a licensed professional, registered with the Federal Council of Psychology, who swore to maintain absolute confidentiality about everything said in session, can justify selling detailed reports of my appointments to my mother for 2 years. Dr. Patricia's face paled instantly, and I saw the exact moment she realized her scheme had been discovered, that there was no way to lie, that the evidence was there on the desk for anyone to see. The receptionist picked up one of the papers, read a few lines, and her expression changed from confusion to shock. Dr. Patricia, is this real? Are these reports from Helena's sessions? The psychologist completely ignored the receptionist, her eyes fixed on me, and I could see her brain working furiously to find a way out, an explanation, a narrative that could save her career. Helena, let's talk calmly. You're clearly having a crisis and misinterpreting some documents you took out of context. Don't try to gaslight me, doctor. These reports have your digital signature. They're on your clinic's letterhead. They have exact dates and times that correspond perfectly to our sessions. They even have transcriptions of things I said word for word. How could I be misinterpreting something so explicit? My voice was getting louder, and I knew I was probably making a scene, but I didn't care. Let me make a scene. Let everyone in that waiting room, let all her patients know what kind of professional she really was. Your mother was worried about you, Helena. Legitimately worried. You arrived here 2 years ago in a serious depressive state, with passive suicidal thoughts, with debilitating panic attacks. As a responsible mother, she approached me expressing legitimate maternal concern about your safety and well-being, and we established an agreement where I would keep her informed about general aspects of your therapeutic progress, especially if there was risk of self-harm or dangerous behaviors that might require family intervention. Dr. Patricia had found her narrative and was clinging to it like a shipwreck victim to a plank. Her voice had recovered that professional cadence, that tone of clinical authority that suggested she was acting within established and appropriate protocols. That's a lie. That's an absolute and complete lie, and you know it. I picked up one of the reports and read aloud. Session 47. Patient reports frustration with maternal pressure about finding new romantic relationship. Describes feelings of inadequacy when mother makes comments about her appearance at family events. Mentions she would prefer not to attend next family dinner to avoid judgments. I looked at her fixedly. How does this have anything to do with risk of self-harm or dangerous behaviors? This is you literally reporting my frustration with my mother directly to my mother. This is you giving her ammunition to continue doing exactly the things that hurt me. The door to the inner office opened, and a woman of about 50 came out, clearly the patient whose session had been interrupted by the emergency I represented. She looked at the scene in reception with poorly disguised curiosity, me still in pajamas, papers scattered across the desk, Dr. Patricia visibly shaken, the receptionist shocked, Beatrice standing next to me with her arms crossed and an expression of someone about to sue someone. Doctor, should we reschedule my appointment for another day? The woman asked hesitantly. Yes, Marina. Please ask Clara to reschedule. An unexpected emergency arose that I need to resolve, said Dr. Patricia, and then turned to me with pleading eyes. Helena, please, let's talk in private. You're exposing your confidential issues in front of strangers. This isn't good for you or for me. Confidential? I laughed again, that bitter laugh that was becoming my new vocal signature. You want to talk about confidentiality? You? The woman who sold every secret I trusted you with to my mother for 2 years straight? You lost any right to use the word confidentiality in my presence. Beatrice finally spoke, her lawyer voice coming out cold and precise. Dr. Patricia Montero, just so you're aware, what you did constitutes a serious violation of the psychologist's professional code of ethics, specifically the articles dealing with professional confidentiality. It also configures breach of contract with your patient. Since the consent form Helena signed at the beginning of treatment clearly specified that session information would be kept in absolute confidentiality, except in cases of imminent risk to life. None of the reports we saw indicate imminent risk. All contain routine personal information that was shared without the patient's consent. This isn't just unethical. It's possibly criminal depending on how the public prosecutor's office interprets the case. Do you understand the gravity of the situation you've put yourself in? Dr. Patricia looked at Beatrice as if only now realizing there was a lawyer in the room, someone who understood exactly which laws she had broken and what consequences she would face. Her face, already pale, became completely white. I acted with the best intentions, genuinely thinking of my patient's well-being, following protocols I considered appropriate given the specific circumstances of the case. Save those excuses for the disciplinary hearing at the Regional Psychology Council, Beatrice interrupted, and for the lawyers who will sue you for moral damages. For now, do you have anything to say to Helena besides empty justifications? Dr. Patricia looked at me, and for the first time I saw something that could be genuine remorse in her eyes. Or maybe it was just fear of the professional consequences she was finally understanding. Helena, I'm sorry if you felt betrayed. It wasn't my intention to cause harm. I really believed I was helping to keep your mother informed so she could support you better at home. Even in that moment, apologizing, she still couldn't take full responsibility. She still used evasive language. If you felt betrayed instead of, for having betrayed you, it wasn't my intention to cause harm instead of, I caused harm. I don't accept your apology. And I don't want your help to process this betrayal emotionally. I want you to know that I'm going to report you to the Regional Psychology Council today. I'm going to sue you civilly for moral damages. I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure you can never do this to any other vulnerable patient who trusts you naively like I trusted. I gathered the papers from the desk again, organized them in the folder. And just so you know, there were 89 sessions. 89 times you looked me in the eyes and lied. 89 times you betrayed the trust I placed in you. $17,800 my mother paid to buy access to my soul. I hope it was worth it to you, because it's going to cost your entire career. We left the office under the stunned silence of the receptionist and Dr. Patricia's devastated look. Beatrice took me straight to her apartment, lent me clothes, made strong tea with lots of sugar that she forced me to drink even when I protested that my stomach was too upset to accept anything. Helena, you need to think about next steps. First thing is to report her to the council. Second is to decide if you want to sue civilly. Third is to decide what to do about your mother. Fourth is to find a new therapist because you're going to need a lot of psychological support to process all this. She was right, but the to-do list left me exhausted just thinking about it. Bea, I can't even process what happened yet. I mean, rationally, I understand. My mother paid my therapist to spy on me. But emotionally, it seems too surreal to be true. How could the two people I trusted most in the world betray me in such a calculated and systematic way? Beatrice held my hands. Because people make terrible choices when they believe their motives justify the means. Your mother probably convinced herself she was protecting you, that she had a right to know how you were because she was paying. The therapist convinced herself she was helping, that sharing information with family was appropriate. Both were wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. But they probably convinced themselves they were right. I spent the next 3 days at Beatrice's apartment, refusing calls from almost everyone, only going out to go with her to the Regional Psychology Council to file the formal complaint against Dr. Patricia Montero. The official who attended us, a man of about 40 with the appearance of someone who had seen everything in the profession, was visibly shocked as Beatrice and I explained the situation and presented the evidence. Ms. Helena, what you're reporting is extremely serious, and unfortunately this isn't the first time we've received complaints of breach of professional confidentiality, but the systematic and prolonged nature of the violation in this specific case is particularly disturbing, he said, examining the reports carefully. We'll open an ethical disciplinary process immediately. Dr. Patricia will be notified and will have an opportunity to present a defense. But based on the preliminary evidence you've presented, there's a great possibility of revocation of her professional license. Those words should have given me satisfaction, but all I felt was emptiness. Revocation of the license wouldn't undo 2 years of spying, wouldn't restore the trust I had lost not only in the therapist, but in human relationships in general. On the 4th day after the discovery, I finally answered a call from Claudia, who had threatened to show up at Beatrice's apartment if I didn't talk to her immediately. Helena, I just spent 3 hours listening to Mom cry and try to convince me that you're misinterpreting a perfectly normal situation where she just asked for general updates on your therapeutic progress, my sister began, her voice oscillating between confusion and irritation. But I've known Mom long enough to know when she's distorting the truth, so I need to hear your version directly from you before forming any definitive opinion about this. I took a deep breath and told everything again. The discovery of the reports, the absurd level of detail, Mom's handwritten notes, the confrontation, the visit to the office. Claudia was silent for a long moment after I finished. Helena, God, I don't even know what to say. This is so deeply wrong on so many different levels. Do you still have the reports? Can I see them? Beatrice scanned everything and saved it to the cloud as evidence for the lawsuit. I can send you the files. Send them. Because honestly, part of me is still struggling to believe our mother would do something so violating. When Claudia saw the reports, her reaction was immediate and visceral. She called me back in less than half an hour, her voice trembling with rage. "Helena, I just read some of these files and I'm absolutely disgusted. There are things here that are so intimate, so personal, so deeply yours that just reading them I feel like an invader. And Mom read all this? Made notes in the margins? Circled specific parts as if she were studying you like a research object? 89 sessions, Claw. 89 reports. Some with 4 or 5 pages. She knows things about me that even you don't know, things I could only talk about in therapy because I thought it was a safe and confidential space." Claudia sighed heavily. "I always knew Mom was controlling. I always knew she had difficulty respecting boundaries. But this transcends control. This is such a deep violation of your privacy and autonomy that I don't even have words to describe it. How can she genuinely believe she had a right to do this just because she paid for the sessions? Because she always believed money buys rights. That if she's financing something, she automatically has ownership over it. I was her project, her extension, so of course she had the right to monitor every aspect of my mental and emotional life." Claudia came to visit me at Beatrice's apartment that same afternoon, and when we hugged at the door, I started crying for the first time since the initial confrontation. I had been so focused on anger, on justified indignation, on taking legal action, that I hadn't really emotionally processed what I had lost. It wasn't just trust in a therapist. It wasn't just the relationship with my mother. It was my fundamental faith in the possibility of safe intimacy, in the idea that we can really trust someone completely without eventually being betrayed. Claw, how am I going to trust anyone again? If even my own mother, the person who supposedly loves me more than anything, was capable of betraying me in such a calculated and systematic way, how can I trust that any other person won't do the same? My sister held me tight. "You'll slowly learn to distinguish between people who deserve trust and people who don't. You'll learn to identify signs of manipulation and control before becoming vulnerable. You'll build new relationships based on genuine mutual respect instead of family obligation. It will hurt for a long time. It will be difficult, but you'll manage. Because you're stronger than you think you are." Her words were comforting, but I couldn't believe them yet. At that moment, all I saw was a future of self-imposed loneliness because trusting anyone again seemed impossible and dangerous. Fernando, my ex-husband, reached out a few days later, saying Claudia had briefly mentioned I was going through something difficult and asking if I needed anything. Despite our divorce 3 years ago, we had maintained a cordial relationship based on mutual respect and recognition that we simply weren't romantically compatible but still cared about each other as people. I met with him at a discreet cafe far from Mariana's house, and when I told him what had happened, he was silent for a long moment, processing. "Helena, I'm sorry you're going through this. And now some things about our marriage make much more sense." I frowned. "What do you mean? Remember when you used to get anxious before your mother's visits? When you always seemed tense after spending time with her? When you mentioned you felt like she knew things about us that you hadn't told her? I always thought it was just maternal intuition or that you were sharing more than you remembered. Now I realize she was probably receiving information from your therapist and using that knowledge to make comments and questions that seemed insightful, but were actually based on direct spying." Fernando's observation opened a door in my memory that I would have preferred to keep closed. How many times during our marriage had I mentioned something in therapy only to have my mother bring up the subject subtly days later? How many times had she made comments that seemed specifically calibrated to hit insecurities I had only expressed in session? Fernando, she used information from my sessions to sabotage our marriage. The realization hit me like a punch. I remember a specific session where I talked about feeling overwhelmed with your work schedule, about feeling alone even though I was married. The next week, my mother made a comment about how some men prioritize career over family and how it was important that I not accept being neglected. At the time, I thought it was just her being intrusive as always. Now I realize she was using direct knowledge of my private complaints to plant seeds of doubt about you. Fernando shook his head slowly. "Helena, I don't blame you for the divorce. We really weren't compatible long-term. But I wonder how many of the tensions we experienced were natural versus how many were artificially amplified by your mother using privileged information to manipulate your perceptions and feelings. She turned my therapist into a corporate spy collecting intelligence about my life so she could continue controlling me, even when I was trying to develop tools to free myself from her control. The irony was so bitter I could almost taste it. I went to therapy specifically to work on my issues with her, to understand why I felt so pressured and controlled, to develop strategies for establishing healthy boundaries. And meanwhile, she was receiving detailed reports of every progress I made, able to adjust her control tactics to neutralize any therapeutic advancement I achieved. Fernando held my hand across the table. What are you going to do now? Sue civilly for moral damages. Beatriz is already preparing the petition. Cut contact completely with my mother, at least for now, maybe forever. Find a new therapist who's recommended by a completely independent source and whom I can trust at least to begin processing all this trauma. Rebuild my life away from her toxic influence. If you need anything, testimony for lawsuits, emotional support, just someone to talk to who understands your family, I'm here, Helena. I'll always care about you, even if it doesn't work romantically between us anymore. Roberto finally managed to find me a week after the initial incident, showing up at my architecture office during my lunch hour. I almost didn't recognize him when the receptionist said there was someone waiting for me. He had lost weight, had deep dark circles, seemed to have aged years and days. Helena, please, just give me 10 minutes of your time to explain some things you need to know about your mother and about me, he said when he saw me, his voice tired. I considered refusing, considered sending him away, but there was something in his expression that made me hesitate. 10 minutes. No more. We sat on a bench outside the building. Roberto took several deep breaths before starting to speak. Helena, I didn't know. I swear by everything that's sacred that I didn't know what your mother was doing. I found out along with you that morning when you left the house yelling. And when I confronted Mariana after you left, she initially tried to convince me it was something completely normal, that mothers have a right to monitor their children's mental health, that she was just being responsible with the money she spent. He paused. It took 3 days of intense discussions for her to finally admit the complete truth, that she had specifically paid the therapist to violate professional confidentiality, that the reports contained detailed information that went far beyond general updates on therapeutic progress, that she had been using this knowledge to manipulate you for 2 years. And what did you do when you found out? My voice came out colder than I intended. Roberto looked at his hands. I told her what she'd done was deeply wrong, that it was a betrayal of the trust you had placed in her as a mother, that it was illegal and unethical, and that she needed to take responsibility and genuinely apologize to you. She refused. Said that if I didn't side with her in this situation, she would ask for a divorce. And He hesitated, clearly embarrassed. I chose to try to maintain marital peace instead of defending you as I should have. I spent the last week trying to convince myself that staying neutral, I was helping to maintain some chance of future family reconciliation. But I woke up today and realized that neutrality in the face of something so wrong is just complicity disguised as diplomacy. So you came here to do what? Ask for forgiveness? Tell me you finally grew a spine? I came to say I deeply regret not taking a firm position immediately. I came to say I'll testify in any lawsuit you file against your mother or the therapist, that I'll confirm everything you allege because I have access to the same documents you saw. And I came to say I'm leaving your mother, that I filed for divorce yesterday because I finally understood that the woman I married isn't who I thought she was, and I can't continue in a relationship with someone capable of violating her daughter in such a systematic way without remorse. The revelation completely surprised me. Roberto, are you divorcing her because of me? Not because of you, Helena. Because of my own moral integrity that I can no longer ignore. During 15 years of marriage, I chose to ignore signs that Mariana was excessively controlling, that she used money as a manipulation tool, that she had enormous difficulty respecting the autonomy and boundaries of close people. I convinced myself these were just characteristics of a strong personality, that it was just intense, but well-intentioned maternal style. But what she did to you isn't just being controlling. It's being predatory. It's being abusive. And I can no longer pretend I don't see this clearly now. We were silent for a moment. I appreciate you coming here to tell me this, Roberto. Truly. And I hope you find peace and someone who respects appropriate boundaries. But you need to understand I can't be your support system during your divorce. I can't be the person you look for when you're feeling guilty or confused about leaving my mother. You were part of my family life for years, but that version of the family is over. Forever. I completely understand, Helena. I just wanted you to know the truth. And for you to know that not everyone in your biological family consciously betrayed you. I betrayed you through cowardice and passivity, which isn't better, but at least you know there was one person who, when they finally saw the complete truth, made the right choice, even if delayed. 2 weeks after the incident, with Beatriz accompanying me as moral support and lawyer, I filed a civil lawsuit against Dr. Patricia Montero for breach of contract, breach of professional confidentiality, and moral damages quantified at 200,000 reais, a symbolic but significant value that represented 10 times what my mother had paid for the reports, demonstrating that professional betrayals have exponentially higher costs than the profits they generate. I also filed a formal complaint against my mother at the police station for improper use of private medical information, although the police chief warned me it was a legally complex case because she was my mother and technically had paid for the sessions, creating a legal gray area that courts would have to decide. I don't care if it's legally complex, I told the police chief. I care that it's officially registered that what she did was wrong, that it had legal consequences, and that victims of similar violations know they have a right to seek justice even when the perpetrators are family members. The police chief nodded respectfully. I understand perfectly, Ms. Helena. And from my personal experience of decades working with family crimes, I can say you're making the right choice establishing clear boundaries and seeking legal justice instead of accepting emotional manipulation based on traditional family obligations. The legal notification arrived for Dr. Patricia 3 days later, and according to Beatrice, who maintained contact with her lawyer, the psychologist was absolutely desperate trying to negotiate an out-of-court settlement before the lawsuit went to public trial that would inevitably destroy her professional reputation, even if she technically won in court. Her lawyer offered full refund of the $17,800 your mother paid, plus $20,000 in additional compensation, plus a formal letter of apology, all in exchange for you not proceeding with the civil lawsuit, and especially not making the case public through media or social networks. Beatrice reported during one of our weekly meetings that had become an essential part of my emotional support routine. What do you think I should do? I think you should seriously consider the settlement, not because they deserve clemency, but because prolonged legal processes are emotionally exhausting and financially expensive, and there's no guarantee you'll win even though you're morally right. Courts are unpredictable. Judges interpret laws differently. And mainly, accepting the settlement doesn't prevent you from continuing with the complaint at the Psychology Council, which is where the real professional damage to her career will happen. I spent an entire week considering the offer, talking to Claudia, to Fernando, even to Roberto, who maintained occasional contact respecting the boundaries I established. Everyone had different opinions. Claudia thought I should refuse and take it to trial to establish an important legal precedent. Fernando thought I should accept the money and move on with my life. Roberto thought I should do whatever was best for my mental peace regardless of financial or legal considerations. In the end, it was a session with my new therapist, Dr. Ana Carolina, recommended by Beatrice through professional contacts who guaranteed complete independence from any connection to my family. That helped me clarify my thoughts. Helena, what do you really want from this lawsuit? Do you want revenge? Do you want justice? Do you want financial compensation? Do you want her to suffer publicly as you suffered privately? Or do you mainly want to close this chapter and move on with your life building new things instead of continuing focused on destroying old things? Her question forced me to examine my real motivations. I want her to face consequences. I want her to lose her license so she can't do this to any other patient. I want official recognition that what she did was deeply wrong. But I don't want my life for the next 2 or 3 years to be defined by legal battles and hearings and testimonies that force me to relive the betrayal repeatedly. So maybe accepting the financial settlement while maintaining the counsel complaint is the appropriate balance between justice and self-care, Dr. Ana Carolina gently suggested. You receive significant material compensation that recognizes the harm caused. You avoid the emotional wear of a prolonged legal process. But Dr. Patricia still faces serious professional consequences through the ethical process that can result in license loss. It's not perfect, but in real life, justice is rarely perfect. It's about finding resolutions that allow you to move forward instead of staying stuck in the past. Her words resonated deeply. 3 days later, I instructed Beatrice to accept the settlement offer with one additional, non-negotiable condition. The formal letter of apology needed to include explicit and specific admission that Dr. Patricia had consciously and systematically violated professional confidentiality for 2 years without evasive or minimizing language. And this letter would be kept as permanent evidence I could use in the future if she tried to deny or distort what she had done. Her lawyer complained that my condition made the letter potentially incriminating in other future lawsuits, but Beatrice was inflexible. Either she completely admits what she did, or there's no settlement and we go to public trial where the evidence will be presented anyway. Her choice. The letter arrived a week later, and even through the legally careful language, it was clear Dr. Patricia was admitting complete guilt. I, Patricia Montero, clinical psychologist registered under number XXXXXX at the Regional Psychology Council, admit that during the 2-year period between January 2023 and March 2025, I consciously and systematically violated the professional confidentiality of my patient Helena Silva Santos by providing detailed reports of therapy sessions to her mother, Mariana Silva Santos, in exchange for additional financial payment beyond regular consultation fees. I recognize that these actions violated the psychologist's professional code of ethics, broke the trust placed in me by the patient, and caused significant emotional and psychological harm. I take full responsibility for my actions and offer sincere apologies to Ms. Helena Silva Santos for the immense suffering I caused through these serious ethical violations. Reading those words should have given me satisfaction, but all I felt was emptiness. Formal apologies didn't undo 2 years of betrayal. Money didn't restore broken trust. But at least there was official recognition of the harm caused, which was more than many victims of similar violations achieved. The process at the Regional Psychology Council advanced independently of the civil settlement. And 5 months after my initial complaint, Dr. Patricia had her professional license suspended for 2 years and was required to pay a heavy administrative fine. It wasn't the permanent revocation I had hoped for, but it was a significant consequence that would prevent her from practicing for long enough to cause serious financial and reputational damage to her career. Beatrice called me immediately when the decision was published. "Helena, you won. Not completely as we wanted, but you established an important precedent about professional confidentiality and achieved significant justice considering the system generally protects professionals instead of victims." I should have been celebrating, but all I could feel was deep exhaustion. "Bea, I just want this to end. I want to stop thinking about what she did, about what my mother did. I want to rebuild my life with people who deserve to be in it. I want to focus on architecture projects that bring me joy. I want to wake up without that weight on my chest remembering I was betrayed by the people I trusted most." Then that's what you're going to do, Helena. You've already done everything you needed to do in the legal and ethical sphere. Now it's time to do the internal work of healing and reconstruction with Dr. Ana Carolina, to surround yourself with genuinely trustworthy people, to remember that not everyone is like your mother or your ex-therapist. 6 months had passed since I accepted the settlement with Dr. Patricia, and since the council suspended her professional license, 6 months of absolute silence between me and Mariana, 6 months without a single call answered, without a message responded to, without any contact that could open gaps for emotional manipulations I wasn't strong enough yet to resist without damage to my mental health. During this period of deliberate and necessary isolation, I built around me an emotional fortress made of weekly therapy with Dr. Ana Carolina, honest conversations with Beatrice, who had become more than a best friend. She was the sister I consciously chose instead of passively accepting through genetics, architecture projects that demanded all my concentration and creativity, leaving little mental space to ruminate on past betrayals. My routine had transformed into a ritual of intentional self-care. I woke up at 6 in the morning every day, did physical exercises that helped me process anxiety through endorphins instead of panic attacks, prepared elaborate breakfasts that forced me to be present in the moment instead of lost in thoughts about the painful past, arrived at the office at 8:30, determined to build something beautiful and functional with my hands and mind, proving to myself daily that I was more than the betrayed daughter, more than the victim of maternal manipulation, more than someone defined by other people's cruel actions. Each project I completed, each satisfied client who recommended me to others, each professional recognition I received, was a small victory that reminded me I had intrinsic value independent of Mariana's approval or validation. Therapy with Dr. Ana Carolina proved to be fundamentally different from sessions with Dr. Patricia, not only because I knew my words were really protected by true professional confidentiality, but mainly because Ana Carolina used a therapeutic approach that empowered me instead of keeping me dependent, that taught me practical tools to process emotions instead of just validating my feelings without offering paths for growth. Helena, the betrayal you suffered wasn't just a privacy violation. It was a fundamental break in your sense of security in the world, in your ability to trust that there are really safe spaces where you can be vulnerable without being hurt, she explained during a particularly intense session 3 months after the incident. The work we need to do together isn't just about processing the anger and pain of the specific betrayal, but about rebuilding your ability to trust again in a healthy way, with appropriate boundaries, with discernment about who deserves different levels of vulnerability and emotional intimacy. Her words resonated deeply because they articulated something I had been feeling but couldn't name. It wasn't just about Mariana and Patricia. It was about relearning how to navigate human relationships without becoming paranoid and isolated, but also without being naive and too vulnerable as I had been before. During one of the most transformative sessions, Dr. Ana Carolina asked me to do an exercise that initially seemed strange, but proved to be incredibly powerful. I want you to write 2 letters you'll never send, one to your mother and another to Dr. Patricia. Not polite or contained letters, but completely honest letters where you say everything you feel without filters, without concern about how they'll react or interpret, without trying to be fair or balanced. Just pure and raw truth about how their actions affected you. It took me an entire week to write those letters, sitting in my apartment during lonely nights where I poured onto paper every poisonous thought, every feeling of betrayal, every moment of pain I had experienced since the discovery. The letter to Mariana was 11 handwritten pages, words that flowed almost automatically from the pen, accusations I would never have the courage to say face to face, hurts I had swallowed for years to maintain superficial family peace. You stole from me the possibility of having a genuine relationship with a therapist because you turned every session into a performance for an invisible audience I didn't know existed. You stole from me years of real therapeutic progress because Dr. Patricia was more concerned with satisfying you as a paying client than really helping me grow in ways that could free me from your control. You stole from me my innocence about maternal love, about family trust, about the possibility of people really loving us without hidden agendas and pathological control needs. The letter to Dr. Patricia was shorter, but equally intense, focused on the specific professional betrayal and how she had destroyed my ability to trust mental health professionals. You had a sacred responsibility as a therapist to protect the space we created together during sessions, and you violated that responsibility systematically for 2 years for money. Every time I cried in your office, every time I shared fears I had never verbalized to anyone, every time I worked through painful traumas thinking I was in a safe space, you were secretly documenting everything to deliver to the person who had caused many of those traumas. You're not just unethical, you're predatory. You found a vulnerable victim and exploited her financially and emotionally in ways that will have consequences in my life for years, possibly decades. Writing those letters was cathartic in ways I didn't expect, not because I planned to send them, but because the act of fully articulating the extent of the damage caused helped me validate my own feelings, to stop minimizing the gravity of what had happened, to accept that my anger was completely justified and healthy, instead of a sign I was being dramatic or vindictive, as Mariana had tried to make me believe. In the next session, Dr. Ana Carolina asked me to read the letters aloud to her, and the process of verbalizing all those raw emotions in the presence of a compassionate but non-judgmental witness was transformative. I cried during the entire reading, my voice breaking multiple times, but I managed to get to the end of both letters without stopping. When I finished, Ana Carolina was silent for a long moment before speaking. Helena, what you just read represents an incredible journey of recognition and articulation of the harm that was caused to you. Many victims of family betrayals never manage to reach this level of clarity about what they lost and why their anger is legitimate. Now I want you to do something symbolically powerful with these letters. She handed me a small metal box and a lighter. When you leave here today, I want you to burn these letters somewhere safe and watch them turn to ashes. Not because what you wrote isn't important, but because the act of burning represents liberation. You recognized the pain, validated your feelings, fully articulated the betrayal, and now you're symbolically letting go of the need for Mariana and Patricia to fully understand or recognize the harm they caused. You don't need their understanding or validation anymore to move forward. That night, alone in my apartment, I lit aromatic candles that filled the space with a calming lavender scent, placed the letters inside the metal box Ana Carolina had given me, and set fire to them with surprisingly steady hands. I watched the handwritten pages curl and darken, the words I had poured with so much emotion transforming into smoke and then into ashes, and felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, definitely not forgetting, but it was a kind of release from the need for them to pay eternally for what they had done, from the need for them to suffer as much as I had suffered, from the need for revenge that was keeping me trapped in the past instead of free to build a future. The ritual was simple but deeply meaningful, marking a transition between the phase of justified anger and the phase of intentional reconstruction. I kept the ashes in a small container that I placed at the bottom of a drawer, not to forget what happened, but as a physical reminder that I had processed that pain and was ready to transform it into something different, something that could strengthen me instead of slowly destroying me through corrosive bitterness. 8 months after discovering the betrayal, Mariana finally managed to find me personally, appearing without warning at my office on a rainy Thursday afternoon when I was working alone finalizing plans for an important residential project. The receptionist had left early for a medical appointment, so there was no one to intercept her when she simply walked through the front door and walked directly to my private office as if she still had unrestricted right to access any space of my life. The shock of seeing her after so many months of complete silence left me temporarily paralyzed. She had visibly aged. Her gray hair was thinner and without the impeccable style she always maintained. Her clothes, although still expensive, seemed too loose as if she had lost significant weight, and especially her eyes had a desperate quality I had never seen before. "Helena, please, just give me 5 minutes to talk to you. 5 minutes, and then I'll leave if you ask. But I need to tell you some things I've been rehearsing for months," she began before I even recovered the ability to speak, her voice coming out in a pleading tone that contrasted drastically with the maternal authority she had always projected. My first reaction was visceral anger that she had invaded my professional space, but something in her deteriorated appearance made me hesitate long enough for her to continue speaking. "I know you don't want to hear me. I know I have zero right to be here after what I did. I know you probably hate me now and have every reason in the world to," Mariana continued quickly, as if afraid I would expel her before finishing what she came to say. "But I've spent the last 8 months in intensive therapy. Yes, I finally accepted to do real therapy with a psychologist Roberto found before divorcing me, and I started to understand things about myself that I spent 63 years ignoring because they were too painful to confront directly." She pulled a chair without asking permission and sat, her hands visibly trembling while holding her purse in her lap. "I discovered I have what my therapist calls controlling personality disorder, with narcissistic traits, which basically means I use control and manipulation as a way to deal with my deep and pathological fear of abandonment. When your father died 20 years ago, something broke inside me, and I became obsessed with never losing anyone else I loved. So I started controlling everything around me, especially you and Claudia, because my sick mind believed that if I could control everything, I could prevent future losses. This isn't an excuse, Helena. I'm not trying to justify what I did or make you feel sorry for me. I'm just trying to explain that I was sick in ways I didn't recognize, and you paid the very high price of my untreated illness." I finally found my voice, which came out colder and more controlled than I expected. "Do you think a psychological explanation changes anything, Mom? Do you think knowing you have a personality disorder somehow diminishes the fact that you systematically violated my privacy for 2 years? That you paid a professional to break confidentiality that should be sacred? That you used information from my most vulnerable sessions to manipulate and control me even more?" My anger was starting to overcome the initial shock of seeing her. "You didn't come here to genuinely apologize. You came to give me an explanation that makes you seem less villainous, that transforms your conscious and calculated choices into symptoms of mental illness you couldn't control. But I read those reports, Mom. I saw your handwritten notes in the margins. I saw how you circled specific parts, how you highlighted information you could use against me. This wasn't unconscious behavior of a sick person. It was deliberate strategy of a calculating person who knew exactly what she was doing and chose to do it anyway. Your therapist is right about one thing. You won't receive my forgiveness," I responded, my voice maintaining that icy calm I had developed as emotional armor. Not because I'm vindictive or incapable of forgiveness, but because genuine forgiveness requires the person who caused harm to demonstrate real and lasting change, and 8 months isn't enough time for me to believe you've fundamentally changed after 63 years of being who you are. You say you're in therapy, that you're working on your control issues, and part of me hopes that's true for your own sake. But that doesn't undo 2 years of systematic spying. It doesn't restore the trust that was destroyed. It doesn't erase the memories of reading those reports and realizing every vulnerable moment I had in therapy was turned into ammunition for you to control me. I stood up from the chair, indicating the conversation was coming to an end. "You want to take responsibility? Then take this. Our maternal relationship ended the moment you decided that controlling my life was more important than respecting my basic humanity. You can be my biological mother forever, but you cease to be my true family. And no amount of therapy or psychological explanations will change that." Mariana sat for a few more seconds, seeming to process my words with an expression of genuine pain that would have made me feel guilty in the past, but now only left me tired. "Helena, is there anything I could do, anything at all, to begin to fix what I broke between us?" I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness or quick reconciliation, but just a possibility. A small chance that maybe in the future, after years of real work on myself, we could have some kind of relationship. Her question hung in the air between us, loaded with desperation I recognized but didn't feel obligated to relieve. The only thing you can do is leave me in peace to rebuild my life without your toxic presence. If in 5, 10, 15 years you've really fundamentally changed, and I'm in an emotional place where I can consider some kind of extremely limited contact, maybe I'll get in touch. But that's a huge maybe that depends on so many variables you shouldn't build hopes around it. For now, and for the foreseeable future, I don't want you in my life in any way. Don't come to my office again. Don't show up at my apartment. Don't try to find me at family events I might attend. You lost the privilege of access to me, and it's going to take much more than 8 months of therapy to begin recovering something remotely like that privilege. When Mariana finally left my office, walking slowly toward the door with shoulders curved in defeat, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness that would take more sessions with Anna Carolina to fully process. Part of me, the part that still remembered the loving mother she had been during my childhood, wanted to run after her, hug her, say we could work through this together. But the stronger and more rational part knew that would just be repeating old patterns where I swallowed my pain to maintain superficial family peace, where I prioritized her emotional needs over my own mental health, where I accepted crumbs of change instead of real transformation. So I let her go. I watched through the window as she got into a car and drove out of my professional and personal life, and breathed deeply, feeling a weight I didn't know I was carrying begin to slowly dissipate. I had done the right thing establishing firm boundaries, even though it hurt, even though part of me felt cruel, even though guilt tried to convince me I was being an ungrateful daughter who abandoned a mother in her time of need. But I wasn't responsible for healing Mariana. It wasn't my job to reward her for finally seeking help she should have sought decades ago. It wasn't my obligation to sacrifice my own recovery to facilitate hers. A full year had passed since discovering the betrayal, and the round date made me reflect on how much I had changed during those 12 intense months of personal deconstruction and reconstruction. I marked the anniversary of the incident by doing something symbolically powerful. I invited Beatrice, Claudia, Fernando, and even Roberto to dinner at my apartment, intentionally surrounding myself with people who had genuinely supported me during the most difficult period of my adult life. The gathering wasn't about talking about the betrayal or reliving the trauma, but about celebrating survival, resilience, and mainly about demonstrating gratitude for the people I chose to keep in my rebuilt life. I want to make a toast, I announced when everyone was seated around the table I had decorated with special care, using nice china and candles that created a welcoming atmosphere. Exactly 1 year ago, I discovered a betrayal that completely destroyed my understanding of family, trust, and human relationships. It was the most devastating day of my life up to that moment. But it was also the day that began my journey of transformation into a stronger, wiser person, more selective about who I allow into my intimate life. I toast to you four, who proved during this hellish year that true family isn't defined by genetics, but by people who love us without hidden agendas, who support us without expecting anything in return, and who respect us enough to honor boundaries we establish to protect our mental health. Claudia was the first to speak after the toast, her voice emotional. Helena, watching you go through this year was simultaneously painful and inspiring. Painful because I saw your suffering and could do nothing except be present and offer inadequate support for the magnitude of what you were processing. But inspiring because you didn't let that betrayal destroy you or transform you into a bitter and closed person. You did the difficult work of therapy, established healthy boundaries even when they were painful, sought legal justice without consuming yourself with revenge, and mainly kept your heart open to people who deserved your trust. I'm proud to be your sister, even though our mother proved incapable of being an adequate mother to either of us. She hesitated before continuing, and I need to confess something that's been bothering me for months. After you showed me those reports and I confronted Mom about what she did to you, she tried to convince me I should side with her because family needs to stick together even when members make mistakes. I almost believed that manipulation because it's exactly the kind of argument she's always used to maintain control over us. But then I asked myself, if someone had done to my children what she did to you, would I think my children should forgive and forget because family? And I realized absolutely not. That actually, I would encourage my children to protect themselves from anyone who violated them that way, regardless of genetic ties. So I cut contact with her too 6 months ago. and my life improved dramatically without the constant pressure of meeting her impossible expectations and her suffocating control. Claudia's confession completely surprised me because she had always been the daughter who could navigate the relationship with Mariana better than me, who could maintain adequate emotional distance without completely breaking off. Clau, you cut contact with her? Why? I never asked for that. Never expected you to choose sides. My sister held my hand across the table. It wasn't about choosing your side against hers, Helena. It was about finally recognizing that our mother is toxically controlling in ways that harmed my mental health too, just in more subtle ways I had normalized for 41 years. What she did to you was so grotesque, so objectively wrong, that it forced me to question our entire family dynamic and realize that many behaviors I accepted as her intense way of being were actually emotional abuse I tolerated because I had never known any different. So yes, I cut contact. For my own sanity, and for the example I want to give my children about establishing healthy boundaries with people who systematically disrespect us, even when those people are their biological grandmothers. The revelation opened a deep conversation about toxic family dynamics that continued throughout dinner, with each person around the table sharing their own experiences with problematic family members and how they had learned to prioritize mental health over traditional family obligations. The conversation around that table, surrounded by people who had proven their genuine loyalty and respect during the most difficult year of my life, was deeply healing in ways different from formal therapy. It was collective validation that I wasn't being dramatic or exaggerated in cutting contact with Mariana. It was confirmation from multiple perspectives that her behavior had been objectively problematic long before the specific violation of therapeutic confidentiality. It was tangible proof that true family can be intentionally built with people we choose instead of passively accepted based on genetic accidents. Thank you, I said simply, my voice choked with emotion. Thank you for being here, for supporting me without judgment, for validating my feelings without trying to convince me to forgive prematurely or give more chances to a person who doesn't deserve them. You are my real family now, and I promise I'll honor that family by being the best version of myself I can be, learning from this painful experience instead of letting it destroy me, and mainly keeping my heart open to genuine love even after being deeply betrayed by a person who supposedly loved me more than anyone. 2 years had passed since that commemorative dinner of the first anniversary, and the transformation I experienced during that period was nothing less than extraordinary. Not in the sense of dramatic external change, but in the deep internal reconstruction of how I related to myself and to the world around me. My architecture business prospered in ways I hadn't imagined possible, partially because I finally had mental and emotional space to focus completely on work without distractions from constant family drama, but mainly because I developed a specialization in projects for women restarting their lives after divorces, separations, or other significant family ruptures. A niche that arose organically from my own experience and resonated deeply with clients who saw in me someone who genuinely understood the need for physical spaces that represented won independence and new beginnings. Each residential project I developed was simultaneously professional work and continued therapy, a way to transform personal trauma into something useful and beautiful that helped other people materialize their own reconstruction journeys. My office, which had started with just me working alone, now employed 3 junior architects and 2 interior designers, forming a small but talented team that shared my vision of creating spaces that healed instead of just sheltering. Romantically, I started dating someone for the first time since the divorce, a 39-year-old literature professor named Isabel, whom I met through Beatrice and who demonstrated extraordinary patience with my slow and cautious process of learning to trust again. Our relationship was fundamentally different from my marriage to Fernando, built on radical communication and absolute transparency from the first date. Isabel knew my entire story with Mariana and the therapist before we became serious, and instead of being scared by my trauma or my need to establish clear boundaries in relationships, she completely respected my pace and my emotional needs. Helena, I understand you need time to develop trust because you learned in the most painful way possible that even people who claim to love us can deeply betray us, she told me during one of our initial conversations about the relationship. I'm in no hurry. I'm not going to pressure you for vulnerability you're not ready to offer. I'll simply be consistent, honest, and respectful, and let you decide in your own time if you feel safe enough to build something deep with me. And if you decide you can't trust anyone romantically because of what your mother did, I'll completely understand without resentment. Her patient and pressure-free approach ironically allowed me to trust her more quickly than I would have been able to with someone who tried to rush intimacy or who took offense at my need to verify behavioral consistency over time before becoming truly vulnerable. 3 years after discovering the betrayal, 3 full years of intensive therapeutic work, deliberate reconstruction, learning about healthy boundaries and functional relationships, I received a handwritten letter from Mariana that had been forwarded through Roberto's office because she respected my demand for no direct contact. The letter was different from any communication she had tried before, without obvious emotional manipulation, without attempts to play victim, without demands or expectations. Helena, I write this letter without hope or expectation of response, simply because my therapist suggested it might be useful for my own healing process to take complete responsibility and articulate understanding of the harm caused, even if this articulation is never read by the person I hurt. The letter began. During the last 3 years in intensive therapy, I deconstructed layers of denial, justification, and distortion that allowed me to believe I was a loving mother while simultaneously controlling and manipulating my daughters in deeply harmful ways. I understood that my pathological fear of abandonment, never properly processed after your biological father's death, transformed me into a person who preferred to totally control the lives of people I loved rather than risk losing them through genuine autonomy. I paid your therapist to spy on you because the idea of you developing tools to free yourself from my control was more terrifying to me than the awareness that I was grotesquely violating you. I chose my need for control over your right to privacy, autonomy, and mental health. There's no justification for this. There's no explanation that makes it acceptable. It was a conscious and selfish choice that caused harm that cannot be undone. The letter continued for several pages, detailing the therapeutic work Mariana had done, problematic patterns she had identified not only with me, but in all her life's relationships, and mainly recognition that she had lost both daughters through her own choices, and that she accepted this as a fair and appropriate consequence of systematic abusive behavior. I don't expect your forgiveness, Helena. I don't expect reconciliation. I don't even expect you to read this letter completely. But in case you do read it, I want you to know I'm genuinely working to become a different person, not to recover a relationship with you, because I understand that ship has sailed and sunk through my own sabotage, but for my own basic humanity, and to not cause similar harm to other people in the future. You deserved a mother who loved you in a healthy way, who respected your autonomy, who celebrated your independence instead of sabotaging it. I failed at this spectacularly, and I'll carry this failure for the rest of my life. I wish you all the happiness, success, and peace you've clearly managed to build without my toxic presence hindering you. Your biological mother, but not your true mother, Mariana. Reading that letter was surprisingly emotional. Not because it made me want to reconcile with her, or because I automatically forgave decades of control and the specific violation of therapeutic confidentiality, but because it represented genuine recognition of harm caused without attached expectations, which was rare and valuable even though it came too late to change anything between us. I showed the letter to Dr. Ana Carolina during our next session, and she read it carefully before commenting. Helena, this letter represents the type of accountability many victims of family abuse never receive. Mariana isn't asking for forgiveness, isn't playing victim, isn't trying to minimize or justify. She's just recognizing the harm caused and accepting consequences. The question now is, what do you want to do with this information? How does this affect, if it affects at all, your healing process and your feelings about what happened? I was silent for a long moment, processing. I'm happy she's doing real therapeutic work and becoming a better person, not for me but for herself and to prevent her from hurting other people in the future. But this doesn't change anything about our relationship. She still made choices that destroyed our connection in irreparable ways. The fact that she understands and recognizes this now is good, but it doesn't undo the harm. It doesn't make me trust her again. It doesn't make me want her back in my life. It just gives me some kind of closure, I guess. Confirmation that I wasn't being irrational or dramatic, that what she did was objectively wrong enough that even she herself, after 3 years of therapy, fully recognizes it. What about responding? Do you feel a need to acknowledge what she wrote? Ana Carolina gently asked. I thought for a moment. No, I think responding to her, even just to say I read it and appreciate the accountability, would open a door for future communication I don't want. The letter makes clear she doesn't expect a response, so I'll respect the spirit of it by leaving this as her final word on the subject. She said what she needed to say, I read and processed it, and now we can both move on with our separate lives. I don't need more closure than that. Ana Carolina nodded approvingly. That demonstrates incredible emotional maturity, Helena. You can recognize genuine growth from her without feeling obligated to reward that growth with access to you. You can appreciate accountability without confusing it with an invitation for reconnection. 3 years ago, when you first came to see me after discovering the betrayal, you were so hurt and confused about appropriate boundaries. Now you have absolute clarity about what you want and don't want, about who deserves space in your life and who doesn't, and mainly about the fact that you're not responsible for healing people who hurt you or for facilitating their growth journeys at the expense of your own well-being. Today, 4 years after discovering those reports on Mariana's computer, I am a fundamentally different person from the anxious and controlled woman I was before that Tuesday morning that divided my life into before and after. Not different in the sense of having completely changed my personality or essential values, but different in having learned profound lessons about the nature of healthy relationships, about the vital importance of boundaries, about the need to choose people in your life intentionally instead of accepting relationships passively out of obligation or genetics. I learned that true love respects autonomy, that real family protects instead of violates, that trust needs to be earned through consistency over time, and not given blindly based on titles like mother or mental health professional. I learned that establishing firm boundaries isn't cruelty but essential self-care, that cutting contact with toxic people isn't abandonment but survival, that prioritizing my own mental health over the emotional comfort of people who hurt me isn't selfishness but wisdom. Mainly, I learned that devastating betrayals can be transformed into tremendous growth if we're willing to do the painful work of processing trauma instead of burying it or letting it consume us through bitterness. My life now is rich in ways I couldn't have imagined during those first months after discovering maternal spying. I have deep and authentic relationships with people I carefully chose based on their consistent actions over time instead of their pretty words or empty promises. I have a prosperous professional career that allows me to help other women materialize their own new beginnings through architectural spaces that heal. I have a healthy romantic relationship built on radical communication and mutual respect. I have a renewed relationship with my sister based on conscious choice instead of genetic obligation. I have mental peace that comes from knowing I established firm boundaries with people who didn't respect my basic humanity. I don't have a relationship with my biological mother, and this absence isn't a painful hole in my life as I feared it would be. It's a clean and protected space where new flowers can grow without being trampled by a person who claimed to be tending the garden while secretly pulling up roots. When people ask me if I've forgiven Mariana, if I ever plan to reconcile with her, if I don't miss having a mother in my life, I answer honestly that forgiveness in the sense of releasing corrosive anger that was hurting me more than her. Yes, I achieved through years of therapeutic work. But forgiveness in the sense of restoring trust and allowing access to my life again? No, and probably never. Not because I'm vindictive or incapable of emotional growth, but because I learned through the most painful way possible that some violations are too deep to be repaired, that some people are incapable of real change no matter how much therapeutic work they do, and mainly that I'm not obligated to give infinite chances for a person to prove they've changed while risking being hurt again in the process. As for missing having a mother, the truth is I never had a true mother in the sense of a person who loved me unconditionally and respected my autonomy. I had a controller who used money and emotional manipulation to maintain power over my life. I don't miss that. I miss the fantasy idea of a loving mother I built in my head to justify her behavior, but that mother never really existed outside my imagination. I end this story not with dramatic reconciliation or cinematic forgiveness, but with something more realistic and perhaps more valuable: acceptance that some wounds don't heal completely, some relationships can't be repaired, and some people need to remain permanently outside our lives for us to fully flourish. I accept that Mariana is my biological mother and that this genetic connection exists independent of choices either of us makes. I accept that she probably loved me in the only distorted way her broken psychology allowed. I accept that she's doing real work to become a better person, and I genuinely hope for her success in that journey. But I also accept that none of this changes the fundamental fact that she destroyed our relationship in irreparable ways, that trusting her again would be dangerous naivety instead of admirable generosity, and that choosing to protect myself instead of facilitating her growth is the right and healthy decision for my own life. I am a complete and happy woman without her presence, and this completeness isn't despite her absence, but partially because of it. The space she occupied in my life, space of constant anxiety, of never feeling good enough, of always walking on emotional eggshells, is now filled with people who genuinely love me, with meaningful work, with hobbies that bring joy, with mental peace that comes from knowing exactly who I am and what I deserve. Did you enjoy Helena's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there, and I'll wait for you.